Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Samach Zayin is about halachos of Tumah and Tahara. The Gemara has two disparate sugyas that are related by the fact that they're discussing the levels of Chumrah, the levels of stringencies of the three Tumahs of Tamei Meis, Tamei Zav, and Mitzayra. Now, as the Gemara will prove, the lightest of the three is Meis, the next stricter is Zav, and the strictest of the three is Mitzayra. This is very important for the Gemara's first series of proofs, which is about the halacha that you're allowed to bring a carbon Pesach if Roiv, the majority of the congregation, is Tamei. So if you're Tamei, then you're allowed to bring a carbon Pesach even though it's Betuma. The Gemara's next discussion will be about whether somebody who is not allowed to come into a certain region because of his tumah, and if he violates that, does he get malchus or not? And again, we'll be depending on these limudim of the order of severity here. So the Gemara is in the middle of the discussion. What is the source for the halacha that a carbon pesach is allowed to be brought b'tumah if roiv, the majority of the tzibur, are tamei? So the Gemara has tried a couple options. The Gemara is not going back to an old one. The Gemara is saying that the source is actually from the fact that the Torah, when it discusses the halacha of Pesach Sheni, that it says that if you're tamei, you can't bring a carbon pesach on Erev Pesach. You have to wait till Pesach Sheni. In the month of Iyar, the Gemara discusses the Torah introduces that by saying ish. A man, an individual, a single person. That implies that this halacha of waiting till Pesach Sheni does not apply to a tzibur. A tzibur is more lenient. It's allowed to bring the carbon right away. It doesn't have to wait. And the Gemara had to ask, who said it's more lenient? Maybe it's stricter. Maybe it's stricter that it doesn't have the second option of Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara is going to prove that you can't say that it's stricter. And the Gemara says the proof that you can't say that it's stricter is as follows. The Torah specifically says that this applies to somebody who's Tamei Meis, Tamei Lenefesh. Now, why would it say that it only applies to someone who's Tamei Meis, Tamei Lenefesh? The other two that are options are Zav and Mitzayra. Those are being excluded, but those are more strict. Obviously, when it's saying that it's only Tamei Meis, it's saying that there is a leniency here. There is a leniency that Tamei Meis has that Zav and Mitzayra do not have. Now, what could that leniency be? There's only two options. It's either the leniency that applies to the Yachid, the individual, or the leniency that applies to the Tzibor, the congregation. Now, as far as the individual, there is no leniency. A Tamei Meis, Zav, and Mitzayra all have the same halacha when it comes to the fact that they are Tamei and they can't bring a carbon Pesach. They're not allowed to bring it during the first opportunity on Erev Pesach, and all three of them are allowed to bring it in Pesach Sheni. That we see clearly from the fact that it's described as ish. It says the word ish twice, which says that all different types of people with different types of tumah have the Pesach Sheni option. So what then is being excluded by saying that it only applies to a Tamei Nefesh? So Gemara says it's got to be referring to the Tzibor, and therefore it has to be saying that there's something that applies to the Tzibor, which is Tamei Meis, that doesn't apply to Zav and Mitzayra. Well, then if that's the case, then we have to be saying something lenient. So obviously what's special about the tzibur is something more lenient, and that is that the tzibur doesn't have to wait until Pesach Sheni, but a Tamei Zav and Mitzayra would have to wait until Pesach Sheni, even if it's an entire tzibur, and therefore we see the halacha that it's got to be that a Tamei Meis tzibur doesn't have to wait until Pesach Sheni. Okay, the Gemara is now going to move on to its next discussion, which is what happens if somebody goes outside of his zone. Now we know that the halacha is somebody who's Tamei is restricted from a level of Kedusha, an area that has Kedusha which he's not allowed to go into. So there are three zones, there are three concentric levels of Kedusha. The highest level of Kedusha is the Azara, the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. None of the three Tumas are allowed to go in there, even a Tamei Meis. The next zone is Har Bayis. Tamei Meis is allowed to go into Har Bayis. In the times of the Mishkan, that was Machane Leviah, the Levi camp. The other two tumas are not allowed to go in there. The next far out is the walled city of Yerushalayim, or any other walled city for that matter. There, the Zav is allowed to go, and the Mitzayra is kept out. Mitzayra has to be outside all three zones. It has to be outside the Azara, outside the Har Bayis, and outside Yerushalayim. As a matter of fact, it has to be outside any walled city at all. Now, says the Gemara, Rav Chizda says that if a Mitzayra goes into where he's not allowed to go, he doesn't get malchus from that. He violates a lav. He violates the lav of going outside where it says, Michutz l'machane teshachan, you have to send him outside the camp. He violates that lav. But he doesn't get malchus. Why not? Because this is a type of isser called a lav hanitik laseh. Lav hanitik laseh means the Torah tells you that there's a lav, you're not supposed to do something, but if you do, you could fix it by doing the following action. If the Torah tells you how to fix it, then you don't have to get malchus, you just go ahead and fix it. Where do you see that it says fix it? So the Torah says, Anaseh, Badod Yeshef, Michutz l'machane Moshavai. he should go out. So the Torah is telling you, says Rav Chizda, that he should go out. Therefore, it's a lav hanitik l'aseh, it's fixing it, and therefore you're sending him out, and that's what that aseh is for, and therefore he doesn't get malchus for that. Now the Gemara asks that there is a brisa which seems to say very different. The brisa very clearly says that a mitzvah who enters the area he's not allowed to go gets malchus. So let's read the brisa. The Gemara says a mitzvah that enters where he's not allowed to go gets malchus. Zav or a zava that go where they're not allowed to go also get malchus. And a tamei mace is allowed to go even into the Har Bayis, even to the Machane Leviyah. Not only that, but even the mace itself is allowed to go into the Machane Leviyah, the camp of the Levim, like when it says when Moshe took the bones of Yosef and they were traveling in the Midbar, so it says V'yigach es asmas Yosef imoi, he took it with him, imoi b'mechitzase, with him into his area, into his encampment. Okay, so now we have a problem. Rav Chizda said that you don't get malchus because it's lav hanitik l'aseh, but the brisa clearly says that a mitzvah who enters where he's not allowed to go will get malchus and doesn't seem to think that it's a lav hanitik l'aseh. The Gemara says that the answer is that it's a machlokes tanaim. There is a brisa that has a machlokes what you do with this phrase badad yeshev. According to one, it's like Rav Chizda said, it's a lav hanitik l'aseh, and it's to teach you that there's no malchus. According to the other one, it's used for something else. And that'll be the one that goes like this brisa that you're bringing that says you do get malchus. What's that discussion about? So the Gemara says that discussion is about the source for this halacha that these three types of tumas have three consecutively larger zones. According to Rav Yehuda, it's learned out of the pasuk of Badad Yeshev. That's what it's for. Rav Yehuda says, how do you know that there are three differing zones at all? So he says from the fact that it says these tumas should not be metame their encampments. That's to tell you that there are three different camp areas, three different ways of defining the camp that they're allowed to be in. Because there are three types of tumah, meis, zav, and mitzvah have three different camps. How do you know that zav is the most strictest one? You have to send him out. That's from badad yeshev. He has to be alone. Badad yeshev doesn't say he has to go out of the camp. It says he has to be alone, meaning other types of tumas are not even allowed to be near him. He has to be farther out than anybody else. Therefore, he uses the pasuk with something else, and that's the brisa that says that it's not a lav hanitik l'aseh. However, Rabbi Shimon says you don't need it for that. There's a totally different source for the three levels of tumah, for the three levels that they have to be sent out, and therefore the pasuk of Badad Yeshev is available, and it's used for a lav hanitik l'aseh. What is Rabbi Shimon's source at the three levels? So Rabbi Shimon says the pasuk that describes the three levels lists all three. The pasuk says, in its words, it says v'chol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lo nefesh v'yishalchu min hamachane kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lo nefesh. You have to send out of the camp anybody who has tzaras, zav, or tumas mace. Now, why do you have to say all three? We know that there's an order of severity here. To just say tumas mace, and then I'll know you have to send out the other two. Obviously, why does it say zav, even though it already said tumas mace, which is lighter, has to be sent out? It says zav to teach us that zav has to go further out. Okay, and now why does it have to say mitzvah? If mitzvah is the same as zav, in how far it has to be sent, you wouldn't have to tell it to me special. If zav has to be sent that far, then mitzvah definitely has to be sent that far. Must be again telling me that mitzvah has to be sent even further out than the zav. That's how we know that the three are sent further and further out. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, how do you know, what exactly is telling me that there's this order of severity, that tamei mace is the lightest, zav is more severe than mace, and that mitzvah is more severe than zav. Where do you see this? In what sense is zav more severe than mace? Let's start with that. So the Gemara says zav is more severe than mace because the zav's tumah comes from his body. It's tumah zav is called by a flow of a material from the male organ of a man. So that is coming from the body. It's more severe than tumas mace, which comes from outside the body. The person just touched a dead body other than himself, obviously, so that's why he's tumas mace from outside his body. So the Gemara says, I hear, but there's still a way in which tumas mace is actually more severe. And that is because tumas mace, you need to sprinkle paraduma water. Tumas zav is no paraduma, so you see that it is more severe. So again, how are you telling me that tumas zav is more severe, and therefore tumas zav has to be sent tumas zav has to be sent further out of the camp than a tamei mace? So the Gemara says, I hear. So I'll tell you something else. When it says that a tamei mace has to be sent out, it says the phrase v'chol tamei l'nefesh. That v'chol includes something similar to tamei mace, but not tamei mace himself, and that is somebody who is tumas sheret, somebody who touched a dead rodent of the 8 types of rodents that's metamayu. Now, tumas zav is definitely worse than that. So if it says you have to send out of the azar somebody who's tumas sheret, and you would know you must have to send out a zav. Obviously, when it says you got to send out a zav, it's saying they have to send it out even further. The Gemara says again, how do you know that tumas zav is worse than tumas sheretz? It says, what do you mean? Tumas zav again comes from its body. Tumas sheretz comes from some external factor. The Gemara says, well, in a sense, tumas sheretz is more chomer though, is stricter than tumas zav. How's that? Tumas sheretz, the halacha is that if a sheretz falls on a person without him doing anything about it just falls on him, and there was no way he could have avoided it, meaning it comes on him ba'oines, it's metamahim. On the other hand, tumas zav, if the liquid is forced out of the body of the man through an oines, which Rashi says comes from excessive eating or excessive activity, these things cause this flow, so that is an oines and it's not metamahim. So you see, in a sense, tumas sheretz is stricter than tumas zav. So Gemara says we're holding like the opinion that says that halacha that tumas zav doesn't metami if it comes minus is only in later additional days of tumas zav. The halacha of tumas zav gets worse and worse in each continuous day in a row that the zav sees. If he sees only one time, he's tamei that night. If he sees 2 or 3 times, it gets worse. So that tama only applies to later, more extensive zavs. But if he sees only one time on the first day, there he becomes tamei. Even if it's ba'oines, even if it comes upon him through an oines, just the Rashi explains this learned of Thomas Carey. There it says explicitly that it's ba'oines, and therefore there is no way in which tumas sheretz is in any sense more chamor or stricter than tumas zav, because tumas zav is also matame ba'oines. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to how do you know that tumas mitzayra is worse than tumas zav? The Gemara says, well, tumas mitzayra has a number of halachas that zav does not have. A mitzayra has to undo his hair, he has to let his hair grow, he has to rip his clothing, and he's not allowed to be together with his wife. You don't find such halacha by tumas zav. The Gemara says, well, there are some ways in which tumas zav is more chamor. Tumas zav is metame anything that he sits or lies upon. Now, mitzayra is also metame anything that he sits or lies upon, but the level of tuma that seat or bed gets from a zav is worse, stricter, more chamor than the level of tuma that it gets from a mitzayra. If it be a chair or a bed that becomes tame from a mitzayra sitting on it, becomes a region of tuma, and it's only metame food or drinks. If it's metame from a zav, it becomes an avatoma, and it's metame the clothing of the person who sits on it afterwards. So it's stricter. Another way in which tumas zav is stricter is the tumas hesed. That's if a zav moves a kli cheres, an earthenware kli, without touching the kli, is metameit. If a mitzayra moves an earthenware kli, he's not metameit. So you see that there's some ways in which zav is actually more chamer than mitzayra. So why are we assuming that mitzayra is generally more chamer than zav? And if you have to send the zav out of Yerushalayim, you certainly have to send the mitzayra out of Yerushalayim. And therefore, the fact that it tells me specifically mitzayra to tell me I have to send them further. How do you know? So Gemara says, you're right, we're not going to learn it out of tumas zav, but when it says zav, again it says the word v'chol, and the word v'chol is again to include something similar to zav, just like we said, sheretz is included in tumas meis, tumas keri is included in tumas zav. Now tumas keri is a seminal emission, which is sort of similar to zav, it comes out of the male organ of the man, but it's a different type of material. Rashi explains it looks different. Other Rishonim give other ways in which zav flows is different than keri. But either way, keri is definitely less severe than tumas tzoras. So Gemara says, and you have to send the keri out of Yerushalayim, therefore you certainly have to send the keri out of Har Bayis, therefore you certainly have to send a mitzayra out of Har Bayis. The extra pasuk that tells me you got to send the mitzayra out is telling me you got to send them further, even outside Yerushalayim. The Gemara says, how are you so sure that mitzayra is more chamer than tumas keri? In what way? So Gemara says the same ways. It requires the hair to be grown and wild. It requires a tearing of the clothing, and he's asabit hashmash amita. The Gemara says, but again, tumas keri is more severe in its own ways. In what way is tumas keri more severe? So the Gemara says because tumas keri applies even on a tiny droplet. The tiniest, smallest minimum size is matami tumas keri. However, mitzayra has a minimum size. A tzaras nega has to be a minimum size. It has to be the size of a gris. So you see that tumas keri is in a sense stricter than tumas tzaras. So where it says we're holding like the opinion of Rabbi Nosson, who says that there is a minimum size to tumas keri, and that is the size to be enough material that it could seal up the entrance of the male organ, the exit of the male organ. So there is a minimum size. It's learned out of the word chasimas that it says in the pasuk describing both tumas zav and tumas keri. And it's halacha that applies both to zav and to carry, and therefore it's actually learned from zav to carry. It says it by zav and it's learned to carry, and therefore we are going with the opinion here that tumas this factor is not an issue, and therefore there is no way in which zav is more chamer than mitzayra. There's no way in which carry is more chamer than mitzayra. It's actually mitzayra which is more chamer than all of them, and therefore the drasha still works and still applies. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to this machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon had said this entire list of drashas to show me that I have to send each tumah further out from the camp. The Gemara says that's a good taina. What is Rabbi Yehuda going to do with that? How come Rabbi Yehuda had to have the pasuk of l'chol machaneim? So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says the fact that it says kol nefesh, kol, the fact that it lists Tomas, Zav, Mitzayra, and Mace, mentions each one explicitly in the pasuk about sending them out of the camp, is to link them for a different halacha. That's to link them that they are, just like Tomas Mace is lenient on Pesach, that at Tomas Mace, if the entire congregation, if the tzibor, if Rova the tzibor is Tameh, you're allowed to bring the carbon. So Tomas Mitzayra and Tomas Zav are connected to that in the sense that they won't get kares if they push their way into the Azara. They aren't allowed to come in, it's still forbidden, but there is a linkage to the extent that if the Rov of the Tzibur is Tameh, they will not get kares for pushing their way in and trying to bring the carbon Pesach itself. That's what it's linked for, it's to teach me that halacha. Now the Gemara says, we learned the kol, where it says kol tzura, kol zav, kol tamei lenefesh, we learned that the kol of tamei mace includes sheret, the kol of tamei zav includes keri. What does the kol of taras include? Gemara says nothing, it's just there because we had kol by all the other ones, it doesn't include anything actually in and of itself. Okay, now the Gemara says, we've noted that the way we understand things over here is that a zav and a keri are the same. A zav and a keri both have to be sent out of the same region. They both have to be sent out of the Har Bayis. So that would seem to be a proof to the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that zav and keri are both sent out of the same region. Rabbi Yochanan said this halacha as part of a two halacha set. He said that the caves and tunnels under the Azara do not have Kedushas Azara, and he said that a Balkari has the same halachas as a Zav as far as being sent out of Tumachnas, being sent out of the Har Bayis as well. So now the Gemara says the problem is that I have a Brisa that says otherwise. There's a Brisa that says that a Balkari has the same halacha as somebody who touched the sherets. So that would seem to indicate that it's the same halacha as far as how far you have to send him, and then you only have to send him out of the Azara, you don't have to send him out of the Har Bayis. It's a contradiction to what we've been saying up till now. So Gemara says, no, it's not talking about how far you have to send them, it's talking about how far the Tumah extends, how long does it extend for. The Gemara says, what do you mean? That halacha says explicitly, Tumas Sheretz and Tumas Keri both have Tumah for the day. As soon as they go to the mikvah and the sun goes down, their Tumah comes off. So why would I need a brisa to tell me that? So Gemara says, it's referring to a different halacha. It's referring to the fact that they're both metame ba'onis. If a sheretz falls on you and there's nothing you could do about it, it's the same as if keri comes out with nothing you could do about it. It was due to some type of excessive eating or activity. Both would have the same halacha that is metame tamasonis. The Gemara says, well, hold on a second. This brisa has a second part to it, and the second part would seem to be talking about how far you have to send, and that would indicate that the first part is talking about how you have to send. What's the second part? The second part says that somebody who's together with a nida has the same halacha as a tamei mace. Now, what extent do they have the same halacha? Obviously, you would refer the extent that they have the same halacha is how far you have to send them out of the camp. Now, maybe you'll tell me, no, it's the same halacha in the sense that they both have Tumas Shiva, they're Tamei for 7 days. That can't be, because then again, that it says explicitly that they're both Tamei for 7 days. I wouldn't need the Brisa to tell me that. So obviously, it's telling me how far you have to send them out of the camp. And now, since the second half of the Brisa is telling me how far you have to send them out of the camp, the first half of the Brisa is probably also linking Balkari and Sheretz as to how far you have to send them out of which camps, and therefore it's a problem because it seems to indicate that Keri is like Sheretz, you only have to send them out of the Azar. The Brisa says no. The first half of the Brisa is talking about the halacha of Oines, and the second half of the Brisa is talking about the halacha of how far you have to send out of the camp, and just because they are part of the same Brisa doesn't mean they have to be Brisa.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.